It's a story that has haunted audiences for decades. The terrifying tale of demonic possession that inspired one of the most iconic horror films of all time, The Exorcist. But what many don't know is that the fictional horrors seen on screen were based on real events. Behind the Hollywood spectacle was the chilling story of a boy named Roland Doe, whose haunting experience would become the foundation for one of the most famous portrayals of possession ever created. And as you will discover, the true events are even more terrifying and much harder to explain. The air was still, the neighborhood quiet, as the Doe family went about their lives in the peaceful suburbs of Washington, D.C. It was the late 1940s, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until the unthinkable began to unfold. For 14-year-old Roland Doe, what started as a series of strange, unexplained incidents would soon escalate into a living nightmare. Shadows moved where none should. Objects flew through the air without reason, and a presence, dark, unseen, began to take hold. At first, it was easy to dismiss the occurrences as coincidence, the tricks of a restless mind. But as the days passed, the terror grew. The events would soon spiral beyond anything anyone could imagine, gripping Roland's life in a way that would shake not just his family, but the entire world. What happened to Roland Doe would go on to inspire The Exorcist, a film that pushed the boundaries of horror. Yet, as unsettling as the movie was, the true story behind it is far darker. Roland's connection to the supernatural started innocuously. He was very close to his Aunt Harriet, a spiritualist with a fascination for the occult. One of the last things she gave to her nephew before her sudden death was a Ouija board, a tool she used to communicate with spirits. After her passing, what began as a mere curiosity for Roland turned into something much darker. Soon after Aunt Harriet's sudden and tragic passing, unsettling disturbances began to manifest within the Doe household. Aunt Harriet had been Roland's closest confidant. She died unexpectedly. Some say from a stroke, others claim it was a heart attack. Her death itself became clouded in an air of mystery. The night she passed, the weather had been stormy, the kind of night that sets one's nerves on edge. Her final breath was drawn in a house that now fell far too quiet without her presence. In the wake of her death, Roland's grief was palpable, but something far more sinister seemed to fill the void she left behind. It started small, barely noticeable at first. Faint scratching sounds would emerge from the walls, as if something or someone was clawing to get out. The family dismissed it as the sounds of an old house settling, perhaps even pests. But soon, objects began to shift ever so slightly. A chair would move a few inches on its own, or a book would fall from a shelf without explanation. Initially, these incidents were brushed off as tricks of the mind or grief warping their perception of reality. But the disturbances didn't stop there. In fact, they grew bolder. What once were faint scratches turned into loud, incessant banging that would travel through the walls, as if some unseen force was growing restless. Objects didn't just move, they flew. A vase would launch itself across the room, shattering into pieces. Chairs were upturned. Windows slammed shut without warning. The once quiet home became a prison of chaos, as though Aunt Harriet's death had opened a door to something much darker. Roland's parents, frightened and bewildered, initially tried to explain the events rationally. They clung to the hope that it was simply the strain of loss, an emotional response to the passing of a loved one. But soon it became impossible to ignore. The night was no longer a place of rest for Roland, as his bed would shake violently, waking him with a jolt. The very air in the house seemed thick with a malevolent presence, something unseen, yet ever present, lurking in the shadows. The final straw came when Roland himself became the focus of these strange occurrences. Welts and scratches began appearing on his body, as if an invisible hand was clawing at him. Words seemed to form on his skin, cryptic, threatening, leaving the family in sheer terror. No explanation made sense, and the family was forced to confront the possibility that something much darker was at play. What Roland and his family experienced soon transcended the walls of their home and entered the realm of the supernatural. The physical signs on his body weren't just random injuries. They were deliberate, horrifying messages that seemed to be etched into his skin by an unseen force. Words like hell and evil appeared. These events wouldn't only inspire the Exorcist, they would become a case study in the potential horrors that lie beyond human understanding. At night, Roland's bed became a source of dread. It would shudder violently, waking him from his sleep, and on some occasions, it would lift off the floor, as though pulled by unseen hands. These disturbances weren't random. They all seemed to revolve around Roland. This wasn't merely an assault on the boy's physical body. It felt like an invasion of his very being, as if something dark and malevolent was using his flesh as a canvas to communicate its presence. The violent, deliberate nature of these markings left little doubt in the minds of those who witnessed them. Every new mark on his skin pushed them further into terror, as if the boy was slowly being consumed by whatever evil had taken hold of him. Local clergy were called upon to bless the house, but their presence seemed to stir even more chaos. Objects would fly off shelves during prayers, religious symbols would fall from the walls, and Roland's fits of violent behavior would worsen. Witnesses reported hearing guttural voices emanating from the boy, voices that seemed to speak in languages he'd never learned. His outbursts became increasingly aggressive, as though something inside him was trying to resist the prayers. The clergy, after witnessing these inexplicable events firsthand, concluded that Roland was not merely troubled, but possessed. What was afflicting him was beyond their spiritual abilities to contain with simple blessings. An exorcism was deemed necessary. And so began a battle for Roland's soul, waged in secrecy, in church basements and hospital rooms. The ritual of exorcism is a grueling, ancient process, one that pits priests against the forces of darkness, demanding an unshakable faith in the face of pure evil. Over weeks, multiple priests attempted to free Roland from what they believed was a demonic possession. According to the testimonies of those present during the rituals, Roland would react violently to prayers, his body contorting, his voice shrieking with unnatural force. Holy water would cause his skin to burn, and religious artifacts seemed to have no effect on whatever was dwelling inside him. It wasn't until one final exorcism at a hospital in St. Louis that Roland was reportedly freed. Witnesses claim that during this last ritual, a loud crack was heard from inside the boy's body, and after that moment, he fell silent. The house became still. The entity, it seemed, had left him. After the exorcism, Roland went on to live a relatively normal life. The horrors that had gripped him for months vanished, and the boy who had once been tormented returned to his family, as if nothing had ever happened. Yet, the case of Roland Doe continues to inspire fear and fascination, becoming the foundation for The Exorcist, a film that, despite its fictionalized horrors, may never quite capture the reality behind it. But questions linger. Was Roland truly possessed by a demon, or was he suffering from a misunderstood psychological disorder? Were the terrifying events that unfolded in that quiet Washington suburb a clash between good and evil? Or was it a case of hysteria and grief magnifying ordinary occurrences into something much darker? The story of Roland Doe remains a chilling reminder that there are mysteries in this world that we may never fully understand.
If you enjoyed this story, then be sure to click all notifications on the notification bell so you can be up to date with the newest true tale. And most importantly, have a ghoulish good night.